Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Us Volunteers talking about the Venus Project. My name is Sašo Luznar, I'm from Slovenia, and today I'm going to be talking about referential education. First off, I want to start by saying that I'm a high school graduate, so I don't really have an academic degree in this field, but I've developed, let's say, an interest in it 5-6 years ago when I got to know the ideas of Jacques Fresco, and that's really something that I've been trying to do ever since. Now, the people that are out there that know me from my previous 30 years of life are very likely going to feel it's quite funny and ironic that I would be the one talking about education. But hey, things change, so there we have it. So education really, I don't know about you out there, but for me it was always kind of a bad word. You know, it was like going to the dentist. Like, you know you had to, you know it's good for you, but you really wanted to get out of there as fast as possible and get back to fun stuff. So that's kind of what I thought of education for most of my life. Another aspect, I think that most of us look at the education as something that we finish at a certain time and then we go to work. So for me it was, you know, when I was 19, for someone 22, 27, whatever it is, and then you go on and work and okay, don't have to look back on that. But that's not really the most productive way to approach education. I mean, education should really never end. That's how we should look at it. Well, it ends in death, but, you know, barring that. So I'm going to go over some of the things here and kind of ask some questions and try to answer as best as I can. And the first one to kick off is, are all kids scientists? Now, generally we get this question, or people already have the opinion of that you're either born an academic or not, that you're either born talented or not, creative or not. We're going to talk a little bit about this as we go, but generally it doesn't seem that way. It seems like we all have the mechanism to explore our environment and interact with it and try to touch it and grab it and see what works. So that's really something that seems to be universal to all of us as kids. So what then happens that we stop with this experimentation? Well, if you think of it, we get told no, right? Because a lot of the things that we want to do is dangerous. So they say, no, don't touch that. No, don't do this. Don't throw that. This is expensive. Don't play with that. We all know how that goes. So that really kind of holds back, because for kids, they don't know. That means experimentation to them. They want to try things. So the first question here is, well, are parents to blame for not, having this better education? Well, let's look at that. I mean, generally the parents themselves have not been educated in how to bring up kids. In schools, for example, we never talk about human behavior and how to bring up kids. So they generally just don't know. And a lot of times you hear this saying of, well, you'll learn as you go. And for me, that's just kind of weird, because the world seems more complex now than it ever was before. And just saying, oh, you'll pick it up as you go along is not the same. If we look back through our history, at a time when the only thing that you had to teach your kids was to, work the land and grow their food or learn a profession, Or, in girls' cases back then, it was learn how to cook and, bring up kids in whatever manner they could. But that's really not so anymore. This world is gone. I mean, we are now in a world that's far more complex than that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Another thing that we have more of now as parents is stress. So we've got these things called jobs, and they're stressful. So a lot of parents, both parents, work for 8-hour days, 10-hour days, sometimes even longer, and that doesn't leave much to then interact with the children and, give them all the things that we're going to talk about today. So a lot of these kids often have, part-time babysitter that really brings them up. So I don't think their parents are really to blame. I don't think they're blamed for wanting some quiet time too. When they get home from a stressful day, they just want to kick back and relax, at least for a little bit. And, so they give kids to watch some cartoons, and hopefully that distracts them for a while so that they get a little break. So, no, I would say the parents are not to blame. I think that really the socioeconomic system that we have today is just not really adequate for raising kids, honestly. That's just how it is. So the next question from that is, okay, well, can we blame the teachers? Are teachers to blame? Okay, so generally we all agree that we should have well-educated kids, right? I mean, who wants less educated kids? Generally, that's a given. But do today's schools really do that for us? It seems like they do that only in a limited fashion. We're going to talk a little more about that later, but still, the focus is on rote learning, repetitive memorization of facts, events, and things like that, instead of trying to get kids to be inquisitive and creative and these other things. We just kind of give them that first set, and that's, boring, and all that information you can just look up on the internet. So, the second thing is that the teachers themselves, they often can't really deviate from the curriculum that was set by the Ministry of, Education or whatever it is, because they might lose their jobs doing it. So their hands are really tied in a lot of ways too. So that's another unfortunate thing of this systems. Do we have any parents out there? Is there any parents in the audience? I imagine there's a few of you that have kids, maybe now grown up, it doesn't matter. But did you ever have a situation where you just didn't really know what to do with the child, right? It was just something was happening, you didn't know what to do, you didn't have the answer. And now you imagine that there's a teacher in school that has 10, 15, 20, sometimes even 30 children in one class in a confined classroom that have to sit down and sit there for 45 minutes. Now the math to me just doesn't add up. How can that even function? So again, I would not blame the teachers here. It seems again that the system that we have implemented today is just not relevant anymore for the 21st century world, really. So, okay, we kind of broke that down. So what kind of education do we really want in the future? Jacques Fresco really gave this a lot of thought and his energy, and basically has tried all these different experiments, like since 70 years ago, I don't know. And basically the only thing that we can do, it seems, is to advocate for a more technical, science-based education where children get exposed to the natural world, how things work, animals, different things from nature and from science, and try to make it interesting. So basically nurturing and promoting the inquisitiveness and creativity and all these things, and also collaboration, which today in school is mainly called cheating, because if you're collaborating with your next door, table next door, that means that you're cheating. And you know, things like that should really be promoted. Instead of that, we have these individual grades where, you know, you have to have a certain grade, and therefore collaboration is not really promoted. You generally have to be better than the other guy if you want to get to the next step of education, etc. It's just kind of turned on its head. I don't know. So, okay. The next thing is, why do we want generalists instead of specialists? So first of all, I want to say that the education system as we have it today was really devised in the Industrial Revolution. So basically its goal is to get children, people, to become workers in a factory in a certain profession. So again, going back to what we said before, this is not really the most relevant today anymore. So what kind of benefits do we have in generalists as opposed to specialists? Well, specialists have some limitations. So mainly it's the fact that they have a very narrow point of operation. They usually do not have a very broad frame of reference. And what that means is they're focusing on a job, on a project, on something, and they're solving things in that area without having the notion of how that resonates with the rest of society. How does that influence other things? And this really kind of, let's say, the worst of this demonstrates when you have people that are working on weapons of mass destruction and other weapons and things like that. It just doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, this is also a tendency in the scientists of today. So a lot of times the scientists themselves are very narrowly focused and kind of, let's say, care about their own little compartment of science and maybe a few that are close to that, but generally do not apply that to social system. And that's really something that we want to do. So one of the things that also comes out of that is, well, narrow use of tools. So if you have a set of tools that are in that area, then generally you're going to apply that set of tools to any problem. The thing that comes up for me here is the saying that, well, if you're a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, right? And that's really something that we don't want to promote, because that means that we have less divergent thinking. We have less what we call out-of-the-box thinking today. And instead we're addressing the consequences of the problems instead of being able to step back and take a look at the root of the problem. Now, I have a funny example for this, you know, cutting grass, which is what we all do outside to make our lawns look pretty, right? So we've done this throughout history, and we started with, you know, handheld tools to cut grass, and then we devised a contraption that you push around, and then that cuts the grass, and then we stuck an engine on it and make it into a lawnmower, and then we got a huge lawnmower with a seat on it, and, you know, we drive away. So all this is a consequence, I guess, a sequential way to solve a problem, and arguably we have definitely gotten better at cutting grass, yes. But a generalist might step back and say, well, okay, so what really is the problem here? We don't want the grass to grow tall, so let's just develop grass that only grows 2 inches and stops. And so that kind of solution immediately has a repercussion of enormous amount of resources saved from all the machinery that we have to develop, from all the fuel that we burn to do it, and all these things. So I would like to see more of that type of thinking, more of that type of problem solving. I mean, I bet that the lawnmower people are not going to like that kind of problem solving, but I think you get my case. Okay, so another question that usually comes up at this point is, well, are there not going to be any specialists in a resource-based economy or what? Well, no, that's not true. We will have specialists in the resource-based economy because people will generally want to focus on the fields of study that they find the most interesting. But they will have a background of all these different scientific fields, and they will understand the interrelatedness of all these fields, and they will understand that science is not just science of physics, science of math, science of biology. It's everything is science, science of how the world works, if you want it. So if you do that and you then specialize in something, then you understand that there are consequences of whatever it is that you're doing that influence all of these other fields as well. And if you have that mentality, if you take that into account, then there is no way that somebody's going to go out there and develop a nuclear weapon or develop a factory that pollutes the environment. That's just not something that you do if you have this broad frame of reference. So the next thing before we go on to the really nitty and gritty of referential education is a little bit about creativity and talent that we touched on before. Again, I'm saying that the majority of people seem to believe that you're either born that way, you're creative or not, you have talent or not. Again, we would say that's not the case. But let's entertain that notion for a little bit and make the example of Nikola Tesla. I think that you probably know who he is, a designer and inventor. Let's say that we take him as a baby and we parachute him on an island of natives that only know of fishing, foraging, and some carpentry to build their huts. Now, if all these talents and all this creativity was born into Nikola Tesla, then you would expect that he would develop all the things that he developed on that island too. But do you think that that would really happen? I don't think so. I think that he would probably be a fisherman or a carpenter or something of that sort. So there has to be an environment that stimulates what we call creativity, what we call talent. And generally, creativity can be taught. And what we today call talent, I would say, is usually backed up by a lot of hard work and repetition, or depending on what it is that you're doing. So that's really something that we will focus on. Creativity basically is just assembling known elements into unique ways. And that can be taught, again, with broad frame of reference, with many things, many experiments that you do, with many things that you get exposed to. The more of that you do, the more creative you're going to be. Okay, so referential education. I'm going to mostly talk about the part of growing up from very young kids to, let's say, somewhere in their adolescence. And I want to start off with the brain's plasticity and what that means. So the brain is very malleable. It adapts very well to the environment. So whatever kind of input you put into it, it organizes itself around that. So one of the things that there's a positive and a negative spin to that is that basically as kids, we can be taught to believe anything because we do not have another reference, we do not have a comparison for that information. So we believe it, we take that information in. So knowing that, the Venus Project really proposes that we learn about the natural world and not give children any fairy tales, because all of that has to be undone later in life, and later in life it's problematic. And I'll get back to that a little later too. Okay, so what can we do in this process from a very young age? Now, one of the things that was very interesting for me is that you can start communication with children even before they learn to talk. And I was like, how can that be? How can you do that? Well, you can start off by arranging the environment in their immediate area so that they have different things that they can interact with. So, for example, you have a green button here, and when the child goes on and, presses it or does something with it, a light turns on. And then you have another one that's a yellow color, and the child presses it and it turns on the toy and it goes around. And then the third one turns on music or things like that. And so you can create this early associations and really start to wire the brain very early on, and even communicate before the development of language. So that for me was very interesting, and that's something that you can try really, really early on. Okay, so the next thing is, of course, giving them different objects to interact with the environment, giving them objects of different sizes, shapes, colors, and when they're old enough, objects that they can fit together, right, that they can assemble. So if we're talking about Legos or some kind of bricks like that, and then reinforce them when there's a positive outcome. When they put something together, reinforce that behavior. And what that creates is really the beginning of this problem-solving type of mentality, a type of attitude in behavioral patterns. So this is very important, and this is something that we can do. Okay, so another thing that comes around about at this stage is when parents need time off or something like that, they give children some kind of cartoon to watch. So what we would say is, well, instead of a cartoon, how about giving cartoons like Cinderella and Mickey Mouse and Teletubbies? Awful. Giving them animated series maybe that are on science. So there's a lot of things out there right now that you can show them, and without kind of exposing them to these fictional characters and stories that often don't really have much to do with the real world. So okay, so generally what the question that I get at this stage from people is okay, hold on. So, but what do you want to do with the kids for fun? Are you not going to let them play? What's up with that? Kids just like to, play around. And what it turns out is that when you research that notion of fun, is that it's really conditioned by different cultures, by different events in our lives. Like, for example, there's people that consider it fun to jump out of an airplane without a parachute and then land in a bunch of cardboard boxes. So for me, I would characterize that not as fun, but as something else. And then on the other hand of that spectrum are people that like to stay at home and collect minerals and rocks, and that's fun to them. So who are we to judge what's fun and what's not fun? Well, we can't, because it's really conditioned into us by the events in our environment. So so we can make the science really fun. And there's actually, I would say, it's super easy to make science fun, because there's so many experiments out there that you can do, and every day can be a new experiment, and every day can be something fun. So again, this is something that will just promote a win-win situation for the children, of both having fun, and at the same time, while they're having fun, they're learning about the world. So I think that's the best case scenario. All right, so the next thing is the need for learning and arriving at goals. So the need for learning is really something that generally we kind of skip on today, because when we learn something in school, it's presented as, here are the facts, you have to memorize it, because there's going to be questions afterward and you're going to get a grade based on knowing this or not knowing. But there's really no explanation as far as what they're really going to use this knowledge for, or with, or if ever. So what we want to do is We want to create an environment where the child understands that they will benefit by learning something. So instead of just learning their ABCs, what you can do, for example, is you can read a book like you do in the evening to your kids, and about nature or whatever it is. And when you come to an interesting part, you close the book and say, you know what, I'm tired right now, so we'll have to finish this part tomorrow. And then the kids are going to say, well, I want to hear the end of that now. So, and what you can say is, well, tomorrow I can teach you how to read, and then if you're going to want to finish the story, you can do it by yourself. And this way, the kids understand that if they learn something, that will benefit, that will be in their best interest, because then they can do more things that they want to do. And so if you apply that, that's really something that will be useful for the kids as a behavioral pattern in the future. Another thing that seems to be prevalent today in some areas is that because we have a world where we have more material things, and generally we can get more of these different gadgets and tools, is that parents buy kids everything. They come to the store, kids want this, I want this, I want this, and then they get everything, to get them off their back, kind of, okay, stop bothering me. So, and that, I would say that's not really a good approach, and the reason for that is because the real world is not that way. In the real world, you don't get things right away. Sometimes you don't get them at all, and you have to work for them. So you don't get them right away. You get them maybe in the future. So, so I think this is really something that that we shouldn't be doing. And additionally to that, it opens up the kids later in life to to be angry when things don't get their way, or even get depressed, because they don't have these problem-solving tools that they really should have. So I would say that's really not the best mechanism to go. So how do you kind of build into your, or our, let's say, education or upbringing, this delayed gratification or the delayed reward? Because obviously we don't want to say kids, no, you can't have this, no, you can't have that, no, you can't have anything. We don't want to do that either. But let's say that the child is interested in astronomy and the planets and things like that, and they want a telescope. And so what you do is you run right out, or you go to Amazon and order it right away to get the child off your back, right? No, wrong. So that's what we want to avoid. So what we do is, or what we can do, or maybe should do, or at least try it out, is say to the child, okay, we're going to get it, but we're going to get it in 3 weeks or next month. Now that might seem far off to a child in their point of view, but what that does is you're going to see if the child is really interested in that topic or not. And in this time, it gives you great opportunity to expose the kid or the child to all these different information that have to do with, science of astronomy, the telescopes themselves. You can watch videos. You can go into how telescopes were developed throughout history. You can even get them a little magnifying glass and, test things out that way. All that brings, gives them the anticipation. And then when they finally do get that telescope, they appreciate it a lot more, because they had to work for it. They had to wait for it. They had to, they got to know a lot about other aspects of what a telescope does. And so when they do get it, try to leave them to be the ones to set it up and to, read all the instructions and this and that, and kind of lead the way into this experiment of theirs. So, and when they do that, what we also should suggest is, well, invite your friends over, and to share that with them. Again, this will promote the sharing aspect But additionally to that, it will also give them the ability and the opportunity that when a friend comes over, they are going to be the ones explaining how the telescope works and how they got to know all these cool things. And so it gives them that experience of being the person to communicate. It will solidify their knowledge of the topic, and they will also gain communication skills about the topic when they engage other people. So, okay, so that another thing that we'll go to directly from that example is the importance of collaboration. So again, as we mentioned before, there's not enough collaboration. What do we do about it? Well, changing the environment to promote collaboration, again, would be the solution that we want to do. The question is, well, how do you do that? And also, how do you do that without just telling kids, hey, you should collaborate, hey, you should work together, hey, you should share things. That's not the best way to do it, because again, you're not telling kids why they should do that. Why is it beneficial to collaborate? Why is it beneficial to share? So what we want to do is create, again, the environment that will foster that. And an example of that is, let's say we have 4 kids that are all into building things and engineering. They want to create, and we have a workshop, and we have 4 of those kids in the workshop, and there's a whole bunch of different parts and tools and everything is around for them to work on. And there's an interface on the wall that they can communicate with, and there's a whole bunch of things that they can build. And so let's say, for the sake of this example, that they choose a go-kart racer. They want to build a go-kart racer. And after they choose that, there's on that interface, it comes on, well, how do you build this? This is what the procedure, this is what you need to do, and there's a video explaining all the steps and procedure. And so in that process, there are things that they have to do where they need 2 people for it, or 3 people for it, or even all 4 of them have to work together to make that step happen. So in practice, for example, if they want to attach the wheel assemblies, 2 kids have to come up front and lift the front of the cart, and then the other 2 kids put on the wheel assemblies, and then on the other side, on the back side, they switch those tasks around. So this way, they understand that for some things, it's paramount, it's really important for them to collaborate. And after they go on through a few of these exercises or examples, then we don't have to tell them, hey, you should collaborate, or you should share, because they understand that there's benefit in that. Things are easier, things get done faster, and therefore, when they're going to be thinking about these things, they will understand that sharing is the way to go, because it just makes things a lot easier. Okay, so the last few points before I wrap this up, studying behavior is something that I want to touch on. We know that last week Dean had a session on education, so on human behavior, sorry, so you can check that out. There's also more material on the website on human behavior if you want to dig into that more. I will just try to put out a few things of why it's important for kids to get exposed to it. So one thing that we kind of already mentioned is that, well, nobody teaches you that today. So when you're in a position to bring up your own kids, you don't have any information on human behavior. So that's not good. So in the future, that's what kids should learn. Additionally to that, even when they're still kids, if they understand why certain people are communicating with them in a certain way, and how people come from different environments and how they have different values, and that they were shaped by being exposed to different information, that gives them a lot more tools to communicate, and also it gives them a more constructive way to respond to other people's communication attempts. So basically they do not get angry, they don't blame other people. They approach it from the point of view of, well, this person had to have gone through some events in his life to make him feel this way or, act this way or whatnot, and maybe I should explore that more. So it really gives you this tool to not blame other people for what's happening. And then one other thing to take away is developing habits. Again, like creativity, this is a big topic that we could have a separate session on, but just for the purpose of here, I'm going to try and then touch on a few things. One of the things that we mentioned before, irrelevant or non-productive habits that we get when we're children are really problematic and later in life. I'm sure that you have some of those. I know that I have those that I would really like to get away from, but it's hard. So once you get used to all these habits, it's really hard to kick them. And so if we can prevent these habits from forming in the first place, then we can form constructive habits and not have these problems later in life. So for me personally, I have a problem with getting to read books because that's something that I haven't been conditioned much when I was younger. And so I very much have no problem whatsoever watching Star Trek, for example. So so that's really something that I guess I have to work on still. As we mentioned before, education should really never end. The last part here, maybe to just wrap things up, I guess the education system today, or the education as it is today, often gets us to be loyal to a certain country or be loyal to a certain idea or to a certain government type or to a certain economic type, things like that. And that's not really constructive. It narrows our view. And what we're looking for in the future is for us to be loyal to Earth and to everybody on it, and really try to do the best that we can to improve the world for us and for all the people around us. So that's pretty much what I have for you on the education. There's plenty more to say, but this is the time that we had for this time. Next time I'm going to try and do more. Until then, of course, you have the book here that's on www.venusproject.com. There's also Jacques' lecture there on education separately for about an hour. He talks about education. So you can check that out too if you're more interested in this topic. And I would like to thank CCN for having us here, and I'm looking forward to the next volunteers that are going to do more topics. So until then, thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.